we go.
We are live on the internet.
We are live. I'm trying to get it live here on Instagram, but it's not going. Oh well.
Who needs Instagram?
Oh, there it goes. I got it. I got it there. Well, Ben, how you doing today? You doing all right?
I am doing all right. Yeah, we've had a full night's sleep the last 2 nights, which has been miraculous. Our 1-year-old was getting up 2 to 3 times a night in the last 2 nights. We actually had our home group, a group of college students and families from our church that we host on Wednesday nights for dinner and some Bible study and just hanging out. We usually share prayer requests, and one of the things we asked for was like, hey, would you guys pray that Levi would sleep better, because it's been pretty brutal the last 2 or 3 weeks. And that night, or no, was it that night? That night and last night he slept way better. So thank you, Jesus.
That's good. Yeah, we had a bunch of leaders that were in our house here for Leader Community Monday, Tuesday, and a bunch of them have young kids. And they were talking about the same thing. They're just like, man, sleep right now is just like, it's highly valued and not getting it very often. So it's good. Well, hey, let's jump in for the Friday conversation. Just welcome everybody. Excited that we're here in December, moving forward. Ben and I started last week on our Friday conversation. We talked specifically around, how do you think about? There's my dog coming in.
Wants to join in on the Friday conversation.
Yeah, wants to join in. How do we evaluate, right? So that was the conversation last week, is around evaluation. Kind of it's a key time for evaluation as we think about coming into the new year. So we spent a few minutes. We want to talk about today for just a couple of minutes is how do we leverage the break, right? So how do we think strategically about this opportunity? Been watching a lot of social media posts. Last Thursday night of the year, last Tuesday night of the year, a lot of people are kind of finishing up. We got Christmas services that are being promoted. We're starting to think about presents. We got office time, that's limited for some people on this call. They'll close offices between Christmas and New Year, or there's limited time. And really the question is I think, how do we leverage this break, right? How do we be intentional with our time that we have? And here's what I want to cover even today, Ben. I would love your thoughts on this, not just on a ministry sense, because I think that's important to how to leverage it in terms of ministry, but I think even personally too, is like, I don't think we all want to just be about like grinding and getting more work done and uninterrupted time. But I think it's a great opportunity, even on a personal level, to kind of pause, reflect, and do some of those pieces as well.
Yeah, we've been the last 3 weeks with the young leaders cohort. We've been kind of wrapping up the year with a series of content and conversations around the idea of like, what kind of rhythms do you need to have in place in order to be able to sustain long-term in ministry? And a key thing that we keep coming back to in those, both like we listened to a couple podcast episodes, read a little bit, and then just talking during our calls, we keep coming back to the idea that one of the key things you need is times where you're going to push hard and work hard, but also times where you're going to have space for recovery, rest and recovery, kind of stepping back. And I think that this season, naturally, culturally, society-wide, tends to be, at least have the potential for being a time of rest and recovery, and like kind of shifting gears, moving into more family, community stuff, and stepping a little bit out of the push of ministry. I think that's important to do that well. And if you're not doing that well, at least from all the stuff that we've been reading and listening to with the young leaders, is there's going to be a long-term cost of that. You may not see the cost in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road, there's going to be some significant cost if you don't have those rhythms built in intentionally.
For sure. Well, let's talk on the personal side too, because I think, what is it? The big question is, what does it look like to win at rest during this season? And so I jotted down a couple of things. Would love to hear even some of the things that you've seen as you've worked with leaders or encouraged them. The first thing I was really thinking about is be very intentional about scheduling your shutdown,
Yep.
Like how do you think about it? And 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 I think there's a level of like intentionality around our calendars, but also I think it's important not to feel. I, I've had leaders who felt guilty about taking time off,
Hmm.
and so how do you be intentional and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be out of the office these days,"
Yeah.
or I'm going to take half days these days, or we're going to go and look at Christmas lights as a family this night. And how do you be very intentional about scheduling your shutdown? I think is so important to block out those
Right.
days, times, etc.
Yeah. I mean, the healthiest, most effective leaders, I think, across the board, um, whether business, ministry, you name your category, they are all have very intentional
Hmm.
space in their life built for, hey, this is me. These are times where I step out of the work that is my vocation and into something different, whether that's with family or hobbies or doing something fun or whatever. I think across the board, you're going to see that. So, yeah, permission needed to do that.
Yeah, and I would say even on top of that is make sure that you're honoring those things. I think
Yes. Yeah.
sometimes as ministry leaders, we see this a lot in our conversations, with different pastors who kind of have maybe a different rhythm where they don't honor their Sabbath, their days off,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden
Hmm.
ministry's like bleeding in. So even when you're scheduling and being intentional in those scheduled times of rest, make sure you're honoring those things. Shut your phone, don't check your email. Like be super intentional on that. So here's the second thing I was thinking on this, and we were talking about this earlier. Is I think that there's a difference between rest and simply distracting ourselves, right?
Definitely.
So like really rest is like how am I going to be understanding myself and what recharges me and refills me? How do I do that intentionally versus distraction, right? So you think about like scrolling on Instagram or
Hmm.
kind of those things that we can do that we sometimes swap out for rest that actually aren't really restful.
Yeah. 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 And I think one of the big differences, this is a conversation we've also had repeatedly with the young leaders cohort about how I think you can kind of sense the difference. Like if you are distracting yourself, you're gonna wrap up that time period generally feeling more dissatisfied
Mm,
and less fulfilled than you did when you started. Whereas if you're resting and intentionally, usually you're gonna end up wrapping up that time, even if it's relatively short, having a sense of like that was good. My soul feels filled in some way. Maybe it's only 5%, but I feel recharged and refilled from that. So I think it's important. And the interesting thing is like depending on um the time, kind of the state of your heart, I think you can be doing the exact same activity
mm,
and one time it's like an escape, a numbing kind of thing, and another moment it might be like, hey, this is a healthy rest, right? The classic example is probably like watching something on Netflix, right? That can be a healthy, restful, like spending an
yep,
evening
yep,
watching something and that be a God honoring thing, or it can be something where you're looking to that as an idol to
yep,
save you, help you escape from
yeah,
the hard day you had.
yeah,
I think it's important just to be attentive to what's the state of your
for
soul and
sure.
what are the things that are gonna recharge you legitimately, and
Yeah,
when are the times that you go to things that are maybe not bad, but are not necessarily
yeah,
healthy.
yeah. And even I was thinking for me, there's times where it shifts from health to unhealth. Of
Right.
like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm gonna
In the
play
midst of the
video games
activity.
for a little bit. I'll jump on my PlayStation and play video games. And there's kind of this line where it goes from like healthy rest, like disconnection, into like binging and like too
Yeah.
much time of like
Uh,
disconnecting from things. So
a bit. I mean, I think one of the big distinguishers from that is things that tend to isolate you versus things that are tending to connect you, right? The
yeah,
things that are tending to connect you more with other people, particularly the people that you love or that are closest to you, those things are more likely to be fulfilling
mm,
and like positive, rest in a positive
yeah,
sense versus distractions.
yeah. Yeah, that's good. The third thing I jotted down here for a conversation today is planning some wins for your personal life. I was thinking about like I think that there's opportunities to, and we'll talk about this on the ministry side of like really reconnecting with people of like, how do you and your wife maybe get away for a
Yeah.
night? You know, how do you do some extra dates? How do you maybe organize the garage? Maybe you finish some books of like, what are some, you know, even thinking about some kind of personal things that
Hmm.
maybe have kind of gone to the wayside because of the busyness of ministry. It's an opportunity to kind of really jump in and re-engage with some of those opportunities.
Yeah, restfulness does not necessarily equal inactivity. I think
Yeah.
we tend to default to like, oh, if I'm going to have a week off and it's going to be really restful, I'm going to not do anything. Oftentimes, I think this is particularly true for guys, but oftentimes it can be a really restful, like fulfilling thing during a vacation or break, particularly holidays. Like if you have a break at home, to get some of those things done
Mhm.
that are like, hey, this has been looming over me for the last 6 months.
Yep.
The garage or mowing the yard or like whatever, some little task. That can actually be a really fulfilling thing to be like, all right, I got those things done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly if you're coming at it with a heart of like of not like, oh, I got to rush and get this done, but just like, all right, I'm going to enjoy this
Yeah.
time. It will feel good to check this thing off my to-do list.
Yeah. That's good. Well, hey, let's shift into ministry for a little bit of like,
Mhm.
what does it look like to leverage, December, those few weeks, maybe early into January to be intentional around ministry. And so the first thing that I jotted down here this morning as I was reflecting on this is it's a great opportunity to connect with people in ministry. You think about like, that can be maybe key young adults or students because the lack of meetings and programming that you can connect with those people, maybe ones that are coming back to town, reconnecting with some of those. I think about leaders, right, of getting together with some of those leaders and expressing gratitude and having them over for meals. And then I was even thinking about, it's a great time to connect with like mentors or coaches or people like
Mhm.
that who can, you have some of that extra time of people who really pour into you, your soul, your ministry, that can be kind of a strengthening season over these few weeks. And so relationships, I think, are key.
Right. One of my favorite things to do in the kind of the week, generally we take the week from Christmas till New Year's off. There's some sporadic stuff that we'll do. We might have some meetings as a team or some stuff like that. But for our family, we try to take that as some downtime. Um, the I really enjoy blocking out usually 2 or 3 hours one of those days in that week to shoot out a bunch of text messages or make some phone calls to whether that be young adults who are in the ministry I'm leading or elementum leaders that I get to coach and talk with regularly, and just express some gratitude or say share with them like, hey, here's something I appreciated. We
Yeah.
had this conversation this year, it stuck with me. And that is, I think there's just something powerful and good for your soul in reflecting on what are the things I'm grateful for, thankful for, and not just like thinking it in your brain, but also communicating that to the person that was a part of inspiring that gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Second thing I was thinking about, and we've done this over the last several years with many of our leaders, is what I would call more of a kind of an evaluation or clarity sprint that you can do over these few weeks, where you begin to assess the ministry, not just yourself, like we talked about last week, but even some
Yeah.
more of yourself in your ministry. And then even blocking out some time for that ministry reflection, personal
Mhm.
reflection as a
Mhm.
leader. And I know you can mention this, but we're going to probably do another webinar again this year on just like, how do you reflect on the ministry? How do you plan as you head in? I think that there's an opportunity to really begin to create some clarity around both where you're at as a ministry as well as what you want to do moving forward.
Yeah. Three big categories to think in if you're wanting to block out time for that reflection. We've got a PDF guide that we've done the last couple of years. Like you said, Andy, you can download that. I forget, actually, we probably haven't posted one, reposted it this year. We should do that on Circle and maybe on our Facebook group or wherever. But I think three key directions you want to think in. One, you want to think backwards, right? Look back at what's happened in the last year. The second one is like take stock of the current moment. And I like to break that down into two separate categories. One, who is God right now? Take some time to reflect on scripture. Who does God say he is? And then who am I, or what's true about me right now? And then the third big category is look forward, which that's about the reflecting on the planning, dreaming, praying for the new year, which is going to set you up well for starting in the new year. Both I think you can do that on a ministry level and a personal level.
Yep.
And I think it's a great practice. Both Kelly and I will do this. I'll take about 2 to 3 hours an afternoon to do that during this next week, and do that personally. And then sometime between now and the end of the year, I'll make sure that my wife gets 2 or 3 hours to go off to a coffee shop and do that same thing. So man, like if you're married, whether or not your wife is in the ministry with you in the sense of like on staff or doing a whole lot in investing in the ministry, most of the people that we know, I think they're pretty involved, both whether or not their spouse is a staff member, their spouse is involved in a significant way. Taking the time to do that prayer and reflection separately, and then coming together and talking about it and saying, hey, here's what stood out to me. Here's what I'm thankful for this year. Here's what I'm thinking about or dreaming about for the next year, can be a really helpful thing as a couple to get you on the same page and help you be ready to start the new year.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So here's the last thing I want to mention is planning for the next year. I think there's a great opportunity to be super intentional around mapping out, whether that's the entire semester, whether that's your quarter, whether that's the entire year. I know I do some of those things at the beginning of the year, and we were talking about this last week in our, we do a goal setting cohort that we're doing right now, around just the idea of clarity. And here's what I would even say is one of the things we talked to them about is mapping out your first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So not just having like, hey, here's my yearly goals. Here's what I want to do this semester in terms of we got a retreat and we got roundup and we have all these different things that we're doing. Yeah, here's my quarterly goals. But what we find with working with a lot of leaders is when we're intentional about kind of front loading the energy on those first couple weeks, we often will see momentum built. And it's like, a runner who's in the starting blocks on a run, right? So all that energy that is required in that first few moments of that sprint to get them out and get them going. And so I think a lot of times even our year or our quarter is the same way. And so even the encouragement, if you're listening to this replay live, map those first couple weeks out, because what we see a lot of times, and you've probably seen this over and over, Ben, is where if people, let's say you're totally disconnected through all of December, you don't do any planning, and then all of a sudden we get back to the January 3rd, 4th, 5th when we're back in the office, and then you're like, okay, what am I going to do? And then you start planning then, and all of a sudden then you're 2 weeks in, and all of a sudden it's like the 15th of January, and now you're starting to kind of like go a little bit. There can be a little bit of loss of momentum when we're not intentional about the planning of a new year and just kind of leaning into that.
Yeah, and that's especially true, or let's say it's exacerbated even more so if you have a team with multiple people, if you have multiple staff members that you're overseeing within your ministry, or a large group of student leaders. If you can communicate to them, ideally before they leave for the semester, or even if it's kind of dropping in a text message saying, hey guys, here's some of the things that we're going to be focusing on when we come back. The beautiful thing about the human brain is God's wired us so that our brain, even if we're not consciously paying attention to stuff, our brain will be subconsciously working on those things. So if you communicate to your people, hey, here's a couple things that we're going to be doing in the first few weeks, just want you to know, be ready, we're going to hit the ground running, they're going to come back much more prepared. And if you have staff members, I think you can get as granular with them as saying, here's our goal for the first 90 days. Here's the 3 or 4 things, have each of them identify, here's the 3 or 4 things we're going to do in the first 2 weeks back, whenever that might be. Maybe you come back right after New Year's Eve, and the day after New Year's Day, you're in the office working, or maybe it's, a week later or whatever. Either way, knowing here's what we're working on right when we get back is going to help you get moving more quickly.
That's good. So let's finish it off on this one, Ben, for today. Is like let's answer the question, like how do you know when you've used break well,
Mm,
right? So
mhm,
I think
mhm.
that there's some signs that we can see in ourselves or in our ministry. What would be some things that you would be indicators maybe for you or for leaders that they've
Yeah.
actually leveraged break really well?
Yeah, I'll give a caveat to some of these because, right, the reality is we don't necessarily control our circumstances all the time. You can go into break with great intentions, and an emergency can come up. Maybe you have something tragic happens to one of your students, and you have to change plans and do some emergent stuff, or life family stuff happens. But in general, I think if you are intentionally resting, stepping back, and doing well, one of the biggest things you're going to notice is you should have a sense of, I'm ready to get back to it. Now, I'll add another qualifier there. If you are intentionally resting, stepping back, doing some of the stuff we're talking about here, and you come to the end of break and you're like, I just feel drained thinking about the thought of going back to the ministry work that
Yeah.
I was doing after this time. If that's something that's happening consistently for you,
Mm.
you need to evaluate, man, and am I burned out on this ministry? Is there some bigger picture things that I need to think about changing? That's probably a conversation for another time. But
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest indicators of a healthy time of rest, especially if it's extended, is the sense that I'm ready. I'm excited to get back to what I'm
Yeah.
called to do.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, another thing for me that I was thinking about is that you feel well connected to people, right?
Right.
And now this is what I would say is that this is not going to be standard for everybody across the board. Like my wife, who's an extrovert, right? She's going to be that's going to her level of connection might be much different than me, who's an introvert,
Hmm.
right? But I think that there's a sense of, well, like, wow, I've gotten to connect with some leaders in some meaningful conversations that I
Yeah.
got to slow
Yeah.
down. I connected with my kids well. I connected with my wife well. So just like the sense of like, man, I feel pretty well connected relationally. That that really has an indicator that I've leveraged break really well.
Yeah. And I think a subset of that might be like, man, when you're going back, does your family, your wife, your kids, and whoever, some of those people that are closest to you, do they have a sense that they've been connected well with? Like, is your wife like, man, that was such a great time. I'm grateful. I'm thankful that we took that time to rest. I feel like we had that space as a family that we haven't had. Um, yeah, I think that can be, so don't let yourself be your sole diagnostic. There's other people who are involved that can give you a sense of that. So if your family enjoyed the time, that's probably also a healthy thing.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and the last thing I would say is that you just have a level of clarity of like,
Yeah.
man, I just feel like I know, uh, not with absolute granular detail everything, but I have an idea of what jumping into January looks like.
Right.
Both I would say in a ministry sense, but even a family sense. So just like, hey, we
Hmm.
know what we
Hmm.
need to accomplish this month. My wife and I have we've looked at the calendar through January. There's a sense where you can jump into the new year and feel really confident that you know what you're jumping into with confidence and clarity and can begin to move
Yeah.
forward.
We didn't say this directly, so it merits stating. I think in that connection piece, you should also, I think if you've had a healthy break time, particularly Christmas, right? We're centered on not just on time with family, but ultimately it's about Jesus's incarnation, God's presence with us. We should be coming out of that break time feeling like, man, I'm more in love with Jesus, more excited about more
Mhm.
grateful for what God has done for me, more excited about what God is doing in the ministry work that we're doing. So make sure you're in that connection space, that you got space to sit down and enjoy Jesus, get in the Bible, get in prayer, and celebrate what God has done for us in Christ.
That's good. That's awesome. That's great. Well, Ben, thanks for taking time today. Just a couple of reminders. I didn't mention this, but next week on Thursday, our team is doing a 2026 vision webinar training.
Hmm.
And so that would be a great opportunity just about getting some of that clarity into next year, into 2026. And then Ben and I, we haven't scheduled it yet, but we'll look at getting that evaluation, ministry evaluation,
Hmm.
personal reflection, some of those pieces I think will be super helpful. So be watching out for those. So I think I'm thinking about next week. This is probably our last Friday conversation for this year,
Yeah,
I think.
most likely.
Yeah.
Crazy that we're already just a couple weeks away from the end of the year.
Yeah, that's good. So here's the encouragement. Be intentional about these next few weeks. Be intentional about your break, both on your individual family side as well as your ministry as well. And I think that there's some good things that God can do in these few weeks that you can look back on this December in 2025 and say, man, I'm super thankful for what the Lord did and the opportunity to connect and some of the plans I got to make and reflection. And yeah, I think it would be really good. So Ben, thanks for taking the time today, jumping on. And we will catch everybody later at some point down the road. Okay. See you guys later.